everybody. Wanted to check in here from the Randolph Hotel out here in Oxford, UK. Coming off the heels of a really interesting multinational, heavily kind of NATO-inflected disinformation conference down at the IET Savoy down in downtown London, and really had 3 or 4 days there of amazing conversations with folks from a bunch of different places, private industry and government, and really a fascinating time to be having a security focused, information security focused conference as an American in Europe, in the UK. And so obviously, as you might expect, there were some strong geopolitical headwinds, some strong political headwinds in general during the conference. A lot related to Ukraine, a lot related to domestic issues in the U.S. and changes ongoing there. And as I was thinking about making this video, I realized each of these talking points that I kind of have come away from the conference with really needs to be its own video, at least, if not a series of videos. Excuse me for glossing over them here. The first and foremost is just that, the EU and NATO's reconfiguration relative to the lack of support from the United States as it relates to information operations was really, overarchingly clear among so many people at the conference. Folks from the continent, folks from France, obviously many folks from the UK, from Canada, obviously from Ukraine itself. Everyone pretty much to a person who wasn't a direct attaché, from the United States, was horrified by what's happening. But that's all to say, the U.S. position on information warfare, especially as it relates to the most important issues to the EU and NATO, really has seen a complete sea change. And multiple folks at this conference described what's happening as a damage that will take a generation to repair. So my first takeaway is just that, regardless of your thoughts on whether that's smart or not, I think most seasoned observers of this space would say that it's extremely dumb of the United States to be doing this at this particular moment and sort of snatching defeat from the jaws of victory vis-a-vis Russia. We can say that whatever the outcome of that policy change, the EU and NATO will be moving ahead on their own in support of bolstering their information warfare efforts. On a more technical level, I think we see that the sort of bleeding edge of disinformation remediation or information operation classification and remediation really increasingly revolves not around assessing empirical true-false kind of adjudications and then debunking things and essentially playing whack-a-mole. The two most, I think, smart strategies that we've just started to see kind of exploited here would be mirroring the efforts in places like Estonia and Finland, where we really have a whole of society effort to pre-bunk society to disinformation and really just create digital literacy is what it's used to be called, and I think there's been contestation of how effective that is. But as we go forward, I think the newer research seems to indicate that there is some meat on the bone here, and that it's an effective way to approach this. But really teaching a man to fish instead of fishing for them each time, I think has got to be part of any strategy in terms of countering disinformation, countering malign influence, countering information operations. It's just really upping the population's coherent understanding of how the internet works and how it doesn't work, and where to find real, verifiable, trustable information. Secondarily, I think the other most exciting sort of edge of the spear sort of thinking around coordinated, information campaign detection really is around the inauthentic boosting or the synthetic boosting of engagement with material online. So focusing less on the specific content and more on the process by which it's being boosted. So really focusing less on empirical content, is this piece of information true or false, and more on the mechanisms that are used by coordinated swarms of personas online to create engagement and artificially boost engagement and interest in a topic. This is also, I think, a really exciting path forward that we need to continue to explore. And this kind of gets us outside of, this is one of those additional videos I need to make, but there's this tendency among sort of supporters of open societies and supporters of pluralism and democracy and all those good things to get really wrapped up in the empirical, what is truth, what is reality, how do we, establish that in a defined way across the internet. And I just think that that's kind of a rabbit hole that we don't need to necessarily go down. It's not so much it's not so much needing to prove this thing is right or wrong, and more an effort to look at why something has become viral, why something is being taken up, and really reflecting critically on how we can work with technology companies to make sure that those kinds of inauthentic boosting behaviors don't continue. Third, and I think maybe less, in a less optimistic sense, there is increasingly, I think, some understanding there's something going on in the substrate of the social internet that really may just be incompatible with open societies, with representative democracy, and that is to say the algorithmic substrate of social media networks really is not geared towards anything other than individual attention and individual engagement. And if you think about it, it reminds me a lot of how we look at corporations, which are obviously designed to foster wealth for shareholders, and that's really all they're designed to do, right? But we continually sort of moralize around these structures and say, well, why don't they do this? Why don't they do that? Why don't they care about the environment? Why don't they care about workers' rights? Well, they're not designed to care, right? They are designed to do one thing, and if we're not going to instantiate some kind of incentive structure to make them care about anything else, why would we imagine them caring about anything else? And I kind of feel the same way about these social media companies. Is the more you look at the baseline of how their engagement algorithms work, they're not designed for constructive civic engagement or rigorous distribution of valid information or any of these things, right? They exist to engage your eyeballs to the app for as long as possible, as much as possible. And I think there's increasingly a reckoning among really smart people in the field that this structure is sort of morally agnostic and politically agnostic. I mean, let's take for the moment let's assume that it is politically agnostic, right? In the context of just a social media system working as designed would be agnostic to empirical truth or veracity of virality even, or certainly it would be agnostic to sort of political preferences. This is before we start to think about the ownership of such a company putting its finger on the scale for their own political purposes, which is completely possible. And indeed, I think we've already seen that in multiple avenues. But that's to say, even in the best case scenario, it reminds you a little bit of the corporation example, I think, in the sense that we're sort of asking these systems to do things and deliver information in a way that they're just not designed to operate. That we need to really, I think, soberly and objectively reflect on this as societies and assess that, really when we have this hyper-granularization, this, really one-to-one granularization of an information environment, I'm not suggesting that we would ever want to return to having one information environment or several, but you can see how the impact of such a system would really start to impact a society where consensus is crucial, right? And I think we've seen this with certain trends recently. I think the one that most stands out to me is actually on sort of the soi-disant, the so-called left-wing perspectives on the conflict in Gaza, thinking about how the information space during the last U.S. presidential election, really I think people were expecting one of these candidates to be so tailored to their individual preferences that it kind of broke down in a way our ability, at least also on the progressive side, to form any kind of coalition, even in the face of what would obviously be a worse choice for the Palestinian people. It's really interesting to think about, and upsetting and scary, frankly, to think about how we all, as we engage with these systems, we are so used to our preferences being sort of preferentially attached to, right? We're so used to our preferences being catered to that it ends up kind of creating this confirmation bias and really, I think, degrading our ability to have real constructive, collaborative, consensus-based conversations with one another where none of us are going to get everything we want, but we're all going to get hopefully what we need. I think when you are used to only engaging with things online that you either totally hate, right, and want to argue with and fight with, or that you completely agree with, you can start to see how this kind of a system, just at its fundamental kind of substrate level, might start to be incompatible with an open society, a society based on deliberate due process and political consultation, collaboration, and compromise. So these are sort of the three things that I was left with coming from this conference: the sort of EU-NATO reconfiguration relative to information warfare away from the United States. Really these sort of best approaches, as I see them, among the many approaches that were outlined here, including sort of this pre-gaming or pre-bunking, and also looking at synthetic augmentation of virality in particular as great technical approaches to fighting information operations and disinformation. And then third, really this thinking more deeply about what is it about the substrate, the structure, the algorithmic substrate, and algorithmic structure of social media companies in particular that needs to be addressed really at a the U.S. a federal level or at a, even almost a supranational level in a regulatory context to kind of constrain, I think, a little bit like what are the ways in which this can be augmented. Obviously, the social media companies are going to want to continue to make money with their algorithm, but how do we attack sort of this deeply kind of incompatible, rigid substrate of social media companies and think about how these systems could maybe better serve society and make for a less granulated information space. That's about it from me today, but really, really curious for your thoughts on this, guys, and as always, thanks for watching.